Good morning, everybody here. This is meteorologist Ernesto Finley. I'm a assistant operation manager here at WRI and a tropical forecast specialist. I have here with me meteorologist Nick Pisapio, and together we are going to be giving you a overview of the 2022 tropical season, how to prepare and what to expect for this upcoming season. So WRI, so here at WRI, we've been on business for about just a little over 60 years here. We currently have approximately just about 60 meteorologists with at least a minimum of bachelor's degree here. We are a 24/7 business here, so that means that you can reach us via email, phone, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Our office is currently located on just up the Hudson River here near Glens Falls, near the Lake George region here. So now with that, I'm going to pass it over to meteorologist Nick, and he's going to be going over the overview for this upcoming season.
Hello, as Ernesto introduced myself, my name is Nick Pisapio. And before we go into this year coming up, it's a good idea to look back at 2022, the previous season, which can give us some strong implications on what's to come. So overall, it was a slightly above average season with 14 named storms. There are about 8 hurricanes and 2 major of those, the 2 major ones being Hurricane Fiona and Ian. And just a little bit of a tidbit here. It was actually the first year since 1997 where there were no tropical cyclones formed in the month of August. And right here, we have just a little map showing the tracks of those named storms throughout the season. Okay, so now let's go into 2023, this upcoming season, and take a look at this outlook here. Overall, we're expecting a slightly below average with about 12 to 14 named storms, with the average being 14 per tropical season. There's about 5 to 7 hurricanes, and of those, 1 to 3 major hurricanes. When we look at the time frame here, during the earlier season, May to June, we are expecting the greatest threat area to be the northwestern Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, although if anything does form, it would be a much weaker system. Once we get into July and September, we are expecting a few storms to develop off of Africa and track towards the northeastern Caribbean with some recurving along the southeastern U.S. coast. There is also potential around this time for a weaker system to perhaps persist within the eastern and central Atlantic, just southeast along the southeast region of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Along with that, we are expecting a near average probability for landfalling hurricanes along the southeastern U.S. coast. Meanwhile, there's a below average probability for any to persist within the Gulf of Mexico and any landfall with the Gulf Coast. And overall, this season is expected to be quite similar in activity compared to last year. So now let's look at the reasons for this. The first contributing factor we have here is the sea surface temperatures. And overall, it's looking pretty interesting. We have pretty high anomalies, as you can see with this map. We have a very broad region right here in the eastern Atlantic, which, as I mentioned, is just right off the southeastern portion of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And these strong sea surface temperature anomalies are expected to keep a storm, a weaker system, perhaps lingering within this region. Along with that region, we are seeing some pretty high anomalies within the Gulf of Mexico and off the northern Caribbean right here, which could lead to perhaps a weaker system expected within the earlier portion of the season.
So yeah, so also given the fact of this warmer sea surface temperature anomalies towards the higher latitudes, especially north of 35 and north of 40 degrees, what tends to happen is that any recurving tropical system may sustain their intensity for a lot longer. So this may bring some impacts to much higher latitudes than what we usually expect, and given all these sea surface temperature anomalies. So this is something to kind of watch throughout the season, especially with recurving systems, as they may sustain their intensity for a lot longer than expected as they head further north.
So kind of on the flip side of the coin here, another pretty big contributing factor to our outlook for this season is El Nino in the El Nino state, which is beginning to develop. And while the sea surface temperatures indicate that that might be a positive or a favorable conditions for tropical activity, the El Nino states actually decreases tropical activity within the Atlantic basin. So just to briefly summarize here, what El Nino state means is due to weaker trade winds over the Pacific, we get warmer conditions within the Eastern Pacific. This ends up altering the upper level conditions. Particularly, this actually shifts the subtropical jet along the eastern region of the US and along its coast. And as a result, we end up seeing increased vertical wind shear, stronger trade winds, and both of these end up leading to unfavorable overall conditions for any hurricane development. And as you can see, we have a couple maps here. This clearly indicates exactly what is expected with the El Nino state. And actually last year, indicated here with this map, we actually had a La Nina state, which actually promotes tropical development within the Atlantic basin. And just to continue on this point, what we have here is a graph showing a number of models that indicate that this trend with El Nino is going to continue throughout the year. Within the next 6 months, we are seeing an increase in SST anomalies. And as you can see with these bolded lines, this is the average of all these models. And as you can see, they looks like they peak just right outside of the hurricane season, looks like it's around late autumn when they end up peaking. So we are overall expecting increasing El Nino state and strengthening of the El Nino state. Actually, we surpassed positive sea surface temperature anomalies about a month ago, and to actually be considered an El Nino state has to surpass a positive 0.5 degrees Celsius within the region. So we are definitely expecting this to continue and definitely result in some decreasing tropical activity, which we'll go more into in this next slide here. As mentioned, due to the El Nino state, we do expect a shift into the subtropical jet, which can be pretty clearly illustrated with this vertical wind shear map here between 250 and 850 millibars. As you can see with this oval I have right here, there's going to be very strong wind shear over the Western Atlantic, and this will actually remain and persist throughout the season. Here's July and into August we have. And overall, this higher wind shear, the stronger wind shear leads to more instability within the atmosphere overall, and this ends up inhibiting any more tropical activity. So this is going to really combat that higher sea surface temperatures we're seeing. And just to continue, we have 1,000 millibar height anomaly maps here, and these do a great job at showing exactly where we're expecting the track to go. So right here we do have May and June, which first of all shows this high Azor high, which is going to persist throughout the season. Once we get into July, we're going to see that even broaden. And with that, we are expecting a bit of high pressure anomalies within the Gulf of Mexico. And both of these combined is actually going to allow more storms to recurve along the southeastern coast of the US. They're going to develop within Africa within the central Atlantic, and as they track, they're going to pass over the northeastern portion of the Caribbean and track along the east coast of the US, which is what we're expecting. And once we get into August, once more, we are expecting this high to persist within the region and even stronger high pressure region within the Gulf of Mexico. And both of these combined will continue and even strengthen recurving along the Atlantic and along the east coast of the US.
Yeah, and also just to bring up another point here, if you look here on the bottom right-hand side of the image, we can see this large area of red down here. This means higher than normal heights right over the equator. So this is right over the ITCC area. So this is where tropical waves come off Africa, and these waves are the waves that then start to move westward and start to develop into systems. And we can see that given this anomaly, that it does look like these tropical waves are going to be tracking a little bit further north than usual, tracking just over the Cape Verde Islands here. And the implications of this is that by these waves tracking a little further north, they tend to interact with the Saharan dust or Saharan air dust layer that is located just off the northern Africa there. And that interaction inhibits further development of some of these waves. So waves may have a little bit harder time developing once they come off of Africa. But once they start to pull away from Africa, as we can see from the colors, these waves will tend to have a better environment, tend to develop a little further as they get into the central and the western Atlantic, then eventually recurving up to higher latitudes before they get to the United States here.
All right, now let's put this all together. And what we have here is the tropical outlook for the early season from May to June. And as mentioned, we're really mostly just expecting a weaker system within the Gulf of Mexico and Northern Caribbean region right here. We are also looking at the potential of a possible extratropical system that may develop and persist along the eastern coast. Although, again, very strong wind shear at this time, cooler SSTs, really will inhibit development and for the most part won't be a major concern outside of some more than average adverse conditions. Once we get into July and September, close to the peak season, we are expecting, of course, a lot more storms to develop, about 3 to 4 within the central Atlantic basin. And these will track, as mentioned, over into the northeastern Caribbean and recurve along the eastern coast of the US. Again, also, we are expecting perhaps the possibility of a weaker system to linger within this eastern portion of the Atlantic due to those very high sea surface temperatures. And similar story can be said with the later portion of the hurricane season from mid-September and through November. Again, we are expecting a couple storms to develop and tend to recurve as conditions remain unfavorable within the Gulf of Mexico.
Now, in regards to some of these recurving systems here, one thing to kind of point out here is that with some of these recurving systems, even though they might recurve away from the United States, some of the larger long period waves may go all the way across into along the eastern United States. So any sort of small towing vessels or small vessels that may go up and down the East Coast may be affected by some of these waves. And even though we might have a system many thousands of miles offshore the United States here. In addition, even though this year the probability of landfall along the United States, especially the southeast coast and the Gulf of Mexico, even though that probability is less this year, it does not mean that we can have one strong system make landfall here. Given as an example here, 1992, we actually did not have a tropical system until August of that year. And that year, that system ended up being Hurricane Andrew, which ended up being a near Category 5 landfall over Florida. So even though this season may not be as active as there are landfalling systems across the Gulf of Mexico and the US, we still need to remain prepared and diligent and make preparations ahead of time, as all it takes is that one storm to make landfall anywhere along the United States to bring pretty catastrophic damage. So we need to stay prepared as we go, throughout this season here. Yeah, and then with that, we are going to be concluding this webinar here. Thanks for anyone that has joined us here. Please feel free to contact us here 24/7. 365 days a year. We are a 24/7 business here, and we'll be happy to answer any further questions and be able to assist you with anything further on this. So thank you very much for everyone. Have a good rest of your day.